Welcome to Freedom and Glory, Tales of American Spirit, where we share inspiring stories of resilience, courage, and hope. Join us as we celebrate the people and moments that define our nation's values and remind us that even the smallest actions can spark lasting change. And here's your hosts, Liz Morris and Bill LeMay.
We're leaning into history with a special July episode featuring Kathi and Jim Turner, the passionate duo behind the Rising Eagle Public House in Melrose, Massachusetts. From the Malden instructions to the fight for independence, this conversation explores how one couple is bringing Revolutionary War history to life. Kathi and Jim, thanks for joining us. Can you tell us a little about yourself?
Well, we're happy to be here.
Same. Thank you.
You tell them about how we got in the restaurant business.
So Kathi and I met in college, and my family has been in the fish business for 100 years. My grandfather started on the Boston Fish Pier in 1924. We've gone through a little bit of an evolution. He started a company in Boston called Turner Fisheries, which became very well known because it was the first company to start shipping fish on airlines. They helped develop the packaging. When I graduated from college, I shortly went and joined my dad, and we started a company up in Gloucester called Turner Seafoods. There was a period of time because of fishing regulations and low fish stocks that we really needed to extend ourselves into the restaurant business because we just needed to be able to survive. And that's basically, it was a matter of survival, opening up Turner Seafoods Grill and Market back 30 years ago in 1994 on Main Street, Melrose, which is my hometown.
He had said, my dad loves to cut fish. And I said, well, you need to become your own best customer. And so that's how we got into the restaurant business 30 years ago.
It's a family-owned business, right? I mean, from what I've read.
Absolutely. In fact, my son and our children are now the fourth generation. Wow. So we're trying to make sure that we pass on something to them that they can transition into what they envision its future to be.
Well, that's a business it's a tough business, and it seems like you've been very successful. And in fact, you had another opportunity to open a new restaurant. And how many would that make? Your latest restaurant is what, the fourth restaurant you have?
It's the fourth location. It's the third full restaurant. Our location up in Gloucester is a wholesale plant, a fish market, and a takeout shop. But we also do overnight shipping of fresh seafood, too.
So we opened our second seafood restaurant in Salem about 12 years ago. But back about 4 years ago, the gentleman that owned the restaurant directly across the street from our original restaurant in Melrose came to us telling us that he was selling the business, selling the real estate, which is something that was very important to us because we do not own our original property in Melrose. And if you're in the restaurant business for the long haul, you really should own your own property because you should be stopped paying rent after at least a decade or so. So we really just decided that it would have driven us crazy if someone moved across the street and owned what we think is the nicest building in downtown Melrose. So we negotiated to buy it, and then we had to go, well, what are we going to do with it?
We looked at each other and said, now we have a building and we already have a restaurant. We're not going to move our restaurant. So it ends up that my husband loves American history. And we had actually just been to England right before this, not even knowing we were buying this property. And we really loved the camaraderie and community gathering spaces of a lot of their pubs. With our kids, we'd go in, we'd play cards. It was so comfortable, so relaxing that when we bought this property, everyone says, oh, are you going to open an English pub, an Irish pub? And Melrose was a dry town until 1979 and never had any pubs or taverns. And we knew they also didn't want pubs or taverns. So we kind of looked at each other. Unfortunately, my husband loves American history. And he said, just give me a little bit and let me start figuring out what we might want to do. And that's when we discovered how unbelievably important Melrose and Malden were one town. And the township of Malden was incredibly instrumental in our initial fights for freedom. So in researching this, we found out that in the 1500s, King George I declared that if you take money for food or lodging, you must declare yourself a public house. And what he was trying to do is create safe commerce, safe travel, safe exchange of ideas. But the colonists, when they came over here, very, very every single township carried that tradition with them. And they started out as public houses and taverns, and they became incredibly instrumental in terms of the initial fights for freedoms. They were the community gathering spaces. A lot of the town halls and meetings were done there. So the concept of the public house was just part of the fiber, especially of the New England colonies.
So tavern owners had a problem though. With these travelers, the majority of colonialists were illiterate. They couldn't read the words Hill's Tavern. Those were the two proprietors that opened the tavern. So what tavern owners did back in colonial era is they would include on their exterior sign an easily recognizable symbol. We don't know why, but for some reason, the Hills chose the sign of a rising eagle. It was either carved or painted, but there are multiple John Adams diary entries detailing his visits to Hills Tavern, sign of the rising eagle in Malden. That begs another question. And I have full confession that you're probably talking to the biggest John Adams fan on the planet. What was the man most responsible for the signing of the Declaration of Independence doing visiting Malden?
Right.
It turns out the Rising Eagle Tavern, because of its incredible support of the rebel cause, was a safe haven for Sons of Liberty and people like John Adams. So that's what attracted him.
And it was in 1749, they fortuitously chose the sign of a rising eagle, not having any idea that 40 years later that would become the emblem of the country that they fought so hard to form.
So to tie in the story of the Malden instructions.
Ask some questions.
Okay.
Well, I was going to say, so, I mean, you bought this building. Did you have any idea at the time that it was the Hill Tavern, or did you just...
The original tavern was located about a mile down the street.
Okay.
But the concept before we bought it was a bistro. And we have a very talented architect, and he was able to age the building very, very appropriately to make it look like it was. So unfortunately, the original tavern, which we have a picture hanging in our restaurant, was demolished. It fell in disrepair. It used to be a
1914.
very celebrated building. During the Malden's, I think, 200th celebration. I mean, that thing is draped in more flags than you can even imagine. But it's, the problem was the story was getting lost, and that's why we were happy to pick it.
And our new building is 125 years old. It's not as if it's like in a strip mall. It's a beautiful old historic building. It just wasn't the original location of the Hills Tavern.
I gotcha. Well, so, I mean, I think you kind of asked one of my questions, how did John Adams, how were there, all this action and things happening in such a small town of Malden? How was this, one of the hot spots for...
Let me precursor before my husband chimes in, because it just so happened that very near Malden, less than probably 5 miles down the road, is a town called Cambridge. And in Cambridge, Massachusetts, it was Harvard University. And back then, Harvard was very, very devoted not only to the Renaissance education, but the concept of enlightenment. And part of the philosophy of enlightenment has to do with self-governance. So most of the people in New England, and especially around this area, were educated at Harvard, those that had been educated beyond a fairly simple level. And back then, almost every preacher had some advanced education, and many of them came from Harvard. So Malden had a preacher. Now you can go.
Reverend Joseph Emerson was the original reverend in Malden. He passed away in 1767. The town was decimated.
He was their preacher for 47 years,
right.
And he was Harvard educated. And he also had passion for the concept of self-governance, is what they named it then.
So the town of Malden goes into an auditioning phase. They're looking for a new pastor, and they would invite a pastor, and they would sermonize them for 6, 7, 8 weeks. 3 years go by, and they have no replacement. And it's January of 1770 the cold winter morning. And they say that the skepticism ran through the church when they found out that the preacher of the week was 18 years old. And then he opened his mouth. He's supposed to be arguably the greatest orator of the Revolutionary era. His name is Peter Thatcher. The town runs to sign him up as their preacher. He was so impressive.
So Peter Thatcher actually graduated with a degree in theology from Harvard in 1769. And so he had started, but he was also an amazing writer. So he was really kind of the full package of a Renaissance man. And the other thing about Malden, under the guidance of Pastor Emerson, they had self-governed themselves for 4 or 5 generations. So when started some of the turbulence, and when King George, what king would be? The third, decided he was going to start telling them how to live their lives again, they had none of that. They said, we're doing just fine on our own. And they had already developed their entire structure of self-governance.
So think about
Peter Thatcher comes in.
So he signed up to become the new pastor, and literally 2 months later, an event known as the Boston Massacre basically throws Boston into a war zone. No one, I think, in those original sermons could have possibly realized how patriotic he was, how much of a rebel he was in support of the personal liberties. And so when you think about colonial America, you think about the person that has the most influence in any town was the local pastor. I mean, they worked and ate and slept 6 days a week. On the 7th day is the one day they took a break. They all went to church, and one guy gets up and stands there. And he basically tells them what they should be thinking about, what they should be talking about, and what they should be acting. And Peter Thatcher, when the Boston Massacre occurred, not only was he in an influential position, but he was arguably the greatest orator of that era. So the town of Malden, week in and week out, listened to Peter Thatcher talk about the importance of personal liberty.
And the inalienable rights given to them by God, because they truly did believe at that time that God had sanctioned humans to do self-governance. And so that was, and the other very important thing about Malden, it was right across the Mystic River from Boston. And every single day, farmers put their main product, hay, onto the penny ferry and went to Boston. So they were not only being educated by Reverend Thatcher, they knew intimately what was happening in Boston. It was occupied in 1768. Now we're talking about 1770. So they knew everything much closer in connection. It was Charlestown and it was Malden that were right there, right in the hub outside of the war zone.
Your values have power when they're shared. Follow Carrot Top Flags for content you can use to inspire others and make an impact in your community. Together, we'll amplify stories that reflect the American spirit. Visit us on social media right now at Carrot Top Flags.
And they were allowed to go in and out of Boston because they were not only feeding, the citizens, they were feeding the troops. So they were the ones bringing beef in and chicken and vegetables. So they just kind of walked in like invisible, what do they call the people in the play that changed the scenery and stuff?
Yeah, stage troupe.
Stage troupe. They were just walked in and walked out, but they were listening to, people like John Adams and Sam Adams talk about, the importance of independence. So, I mean, they were really the most up-to-date town with what was going on in Boston. And that's where all that support came.
Which not the most, but one of them. I mean, Charlestown, Cambridge, Lexington, Concord, they were all very in tune, but Malden was farmers, just kind of like Marblehead was fishermen. And so they were not what was considered the elite class. They were truly the working class, which separated them a little bit from the citizens of Boston.
May I ask, this is the easiest interview I've ever done, by the way. Were you surprised by this? I mean, did you have this knowledge or is this
floored.
You researched?
I was floored because I love American history, and I've been on the Freedom Trail and in all the different Boston historic sites. I went to a Malden Catholic, which is a great school in Malden, and not had a tremendous, great American history teacher, Brother Tim Scaler. I never heard one word about Malden's role, about the Malden instructions, about the Rising Eagle. And I'm thinking...
And Malden Catholics is half a mile down the road.
Yeah.
From
so it's and it's so amazing to me. It would just tie it. It just, when you bring it local, it just makes it all the more real, And so, yes, I was floored, absolutely floored.
I mean, we found out in this research that on the night of Paul Revere's ride, one of the horsemen went directly to Sign of the Rising Eagle, and they call it the Middlesex Alarm, that started the collection. And many people have heard of the Malden Minutemen. Well, 18 of those Minutemen came from North Malden, Melrose, or Pond Field, and they marched 2 or 3 miles to Gooch Park to march 3 miles down to Malden so that they could march out to Lexington and Concord. Like, we don't even want to cross the street.
This is amazing. I have goosebumps thinking about this in our backyard. How do people not know this? How are the other folks reacted to this now that I am sure you've publicized this and they're aware of it?
Yeah, no, they loved hearing the story. We have one of our floor managers at the Rising Eagle, and he has me tell that story like sometimes a dozen times a night, and people they really enjoy it.
But I will tell you, there's a number of citizens in Melrose who are descendants still of the Uphams and of the Spraggs and some of the other families that the names of their ancestors are on our wall as part of the 18 that marched on the night of April 18th, 1775.
There was one of the Malden Minutemen came from North Malden, which is Melrose now, but his name was Phineas Spragg. He was 54 years old, and all I can think of is Braveheart. They said they talk about his fearlessness and just running into the war, bullets flying and him shooting and waving. He was just like, they said he was unbelievable. And on the Battle of Bunker Hill, he is on his way. He's crossing the Mystic in a rowboat, and a British flotilla comes up and starts firing cannonballs at him, and he stands there and dares them to hit him, and they take a few shots and they miss him, and they end up having to get back. So he ends up going back and says, I had to go back and dig up one of those cannonballs to remember the Devil's by. So this is just...
Oh my gosh. Well, Jim, will you tee up, the Malden instructions for us?
Sure. So back to John Adams. John Adams arrived in Philadelphia in May of 1775. He is immediately surrounded by several delegates, and they inform him, Mr. Adams, you have a Massachusetts problem. You need to figure that out on your own. They all knew Adams because he attended the first Continental Congress, and he's had to be the most outspoken person on the planet. So Adams, being Adams, would have none of it. He is relentless. He is a master strategist, but most importantly, John Adams is the greatest debater this country's ever had. He starts. It takes him a year before he finally flips enough, and he finally says, and it's now May of 1776, and he says, I've got it. This vote's going to happen within weeks. He's strategizing with his 2 fellow delegates from Massachusetts, his second cousin Sam Adams and John Hancock. And then there's a new crisis. Because they're from Massachusetts, they are sworn to uphold the will of the people of Massachusetts. They cannot answer that question honestly. So in order to resolve the question, they send an express rider back to Massachusetts to the provincial Congress with one simple question.
It's important to note here that one of the reasons they were so uncertain is because it was on March 17th of 1776 that George Washington had gracefully escorted the British out of Boston. So most of the fighting had really left Massachusetts. It had moved down to Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Long Island. So as they're in Philadelphia, they really aren't totally convinced that all of the citizens of Massachusetts want this declaration because it is surely treason. And they all say, we hang as one or we all hang together. So
they asked for a vote. First town to vote without any hesitation. It is a unanimous vote. I get the chills when I say that.
Yeah.
And it comes with a title, Malden Instructions. It's considered amongst the greatest writings in American history, that people that know about it. Its final sentence is by far the most quoted. This is how it ends. Give them the strongest assurance that if they should declare America to be a free and independent republic, your constituents will support and defend the measure to the last drop of their blood and the last farthing of their treasure. I always think, John Adams, when he heard those words or read those words, he must have been like Tom Brady from the tunnel. That is time to go.
Game on. And while it is not officially signed by Peter Thatcher, all historians surely believe that his pen was very heavy on that paper.
Well, another story, when John Adams returns to Massachusetts, he's asked to write the Massachusetts Constitution, and he happens to go find a guy named Peter Thatcher to help him write that.
Isn't that something?
Wow. Well, I guess speaking of John Adams, I feel like I'm just teeing up other things for you all to tell these wonderful stories. I know you two have a kind of a secret or not so secret passion for John Adams, and I'm
going to let Kathy take this one, but I have to say, I to me, because of what his role was, what he accomplished in that year before that led up to the Signing Declaration, he has to be the most unrecognized person in American history. There is not a statue of John Adams in Washington, D.C. There is not a statue of John Adams in the city of Boston. He is the man.
Not a statue of John Adams anywhere in the United States except for in front of his house in Quincy, Massachusetts.
Right. And just, you think about how his contemporaries are memorialized, whether, you think about the Washington Memorial or the Jefferson Monument, coming back. Mm-hmm. But, Mount Rushmore, and there's John Adams. It's like nothing.
One thing about John Adams, though, what's great is because he was an attorney and because he had defended the British and because he had truly worked extremely hard to create resolution with the issues with Britain, he was intimately knowledgeable about the fact that there was going to be no living together. He had tried and tried and tried. So that's why it took him so long. But the other thing about John Adams is he happened to have a wife named Abigail. And they probably were America's first power couple. And it's very interesting because Abigail Adams was one of the first women to actually save the writings. Because I learned later that women of that era found the writings between them and their husbands to be something very intimate and very private. So they all burned them. But Abigail Adams saved her writings. And so I have a dream that one day in the middle of Boston Common, there's going to be a statue of the first power couple of John and Abigail Adams. Now, Abigail already has a statue in Boston, but John doesn't.
Wow. Well,
one of my favorite quotes
in
all of American history comes from King George III when John Adams is the first delegate to represent the United States to go and meet the king. And as the king is getting ready to figure out who's coming in next through the door, they tell him that it's John Adams from United States, from Boston. And so his comment, and this is in the McCullough book, basically is, I've heard of one Mr. Adams, who's the other? And when you think about that quote, King George just lost the most important chess match in the history of mankind. And he didn't know who he was playing against. John Adams was the one that was orchestrating the entire thing. Adams is the one that nominates Washington to become the general. Adams is the one that tells Thomas Jefferson to go write the Declaration of Independence, even though he had already written it. But he knew that Jefferson would write it better. He was a better writer than Adams was. But and Adams also was following some advice that he was given, that he had to allow the delegates from Virginia to go first. They had to be the lead for that, in order for everybody to kind of support what was going on. And he followed that to the T, and he was successful.
Thank goodness for John Adams. We do need a statue.
I know.
You should build one in front of your restaurant. I guess, you sound like patriots. You really do. You got a big birthday coming up for the United States.
It's a big birthday in Massachusetts this year.
Don't you? You put on a big show, don't you?
Yeah.
We do. We get to.
Well, yeah, I know it's the 250th birthday of the United States. You may not have a statue. Are you doing anything special at the restaurant? You got any ideas that you'd like to share about the upcoming big birthday?
We do a lot about American history all year long, every year, regardless. It was a pretty big day, but next year, on May 27th of 1776, will be the day of the signing of the Malden Instructions, which was the first official vote for independence in the country. So that's pretty exciting. In general, one of the most exciting things that's happening, it's actually happening where our fish company is in Gloucester, Massachusetts, in 2 weekends. They are doing a full reenactment of the Battle of Bunker Hill, right at Stage 4 Park in Gloucester. They're expecting over 700 reenactors to come from all over the world there, and they are reenacting from the sea to the hills for a 2-day weekend. So that's really exciting, and we are actually participating in that, not only with serving some of the volunteer reenactors local fish chowder, but we'll have a chowder stand and also be explaining to people so much more. Because one of the things if I was young or someone wants to reach out to me, I truly believe that every township of the original colonies should have a public house, because every single one of them did, and every single one of them had their own history that played in our initial fights for freedom. And well, now we have a lot more towns. Back then, these towns were much bigger. And I believe that if each town created their own public house, which is a community gathering space, what we base the Rising Eagle on, they can allow the history and the importance of their citizens and their ancestors to live on past. Because right now, people think the American Revolution was a few battles here and there, and then it was over. But it wasn't. I mean, it was 14, 15 years long. And so many people sacrificed so much. So that is another thing. Other than the statue of John and Abigail Adams, I think everyone should have their own tavern or public house that celebrate what their town contributed.
Well, I smell a franchising opportunity for you guys.
No. We're in the back 9.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much. This has been you two. I know you're praising, John Adams and Peter Thatcher, but you two are great storytellers. So I really appreciate you all coming on the podcast and
giving a North Carolinian a chance to pop their chest out a little bit too. We forget these things, and you can't help but just be so full of pride. I mean, so thank you for that. Really,
we're just excited to share the stories. If you don't keep sharing them, sometimes they get lost.
Absolutely.
I guess everybody can go to the restaurant and hear it firsthand.
Yeah.
You'll just sit down. All right. Thank you, guys. What a pleasure. Thank you very much.
It's been our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Transform your space and build pride in your organization. Carrot Top's custom flags and products are designed to help your school, business, or facility stand out and inspire. Explore your options today at carrot-top.com/custom. That's carrot-top.com/custom.
All right. That concludes the interview portion of our podcast. But now we still have Jim on for a special Flags of Change segment. So this segment is where we explore how powerful symbols are often born from the bold vision of just one individual. So at Freedom and Glory, we believe that lasting change starts with one voice, one action, or one spark. So today we're going to talk to Jim about the Bunker Hill flag. So Jim, let's start with the basics. What was the Bunker Hill flag and where did it originate?
Bunker Hill flag is a blue background. It has a white canton in the upper left-hand corner, and then a red cross through that white canton with a pine tree in the upper left segment of that part of the flag. So where was it created? No one really knows. It's a very popular flag in Charlestown, Massachusetts. You don't see it much beyond that. So I guess one of the most interesting things is probably did not exist during the battle. It was created historically after, and it perfectly symbolizes the battle from the American side. I mean, it's blue is the continental blue. The red cross symbolizes the ties they had to Britain, and of course the green pine tree is a symbol of New England and its strength and in its fight for independence. That's the Field to Heaven flag. So I guess, well, one of the most interesting things is no one's really sure. There's very little information about what flags may have actually flown during the battle. People suspect that some of the militia that came had their own flags, but there's really no recounting of that. The one flag that may have flown, most likely flown as more of a universal, would have been Benjamin Franklin's Join or Die flag, because that had become one of the popular. It had and it's had widespread use throughout. I mean, it literally started in the French Indian War. It had been revitalized, or reused, repurposed, I should say, during the Revolutionary War. So that would have been the flag that may have possibly shown, but
So, I mean, we see the Bunker Hill flag in paintings and representations. I mean, you think that was sort of added after.
Trimble, they admitted that he probably had a little bit of artistic discretion when he painted some of those paintings. They're beautiful paintings. So that, of course, is the most popular one, is of Dr. Joseph Warren, who, like John Adams, is another one that should be more immortalized, more so than he is. He was a tremendous, tremendous patriot.
Well, why would that flag end up representing the battle? If it was,
I think it's because it's so perfectly symbolizes the blue, the colors, and the British flag, the British cross, and the green. I mean, it just literally is everything you want a flag to be, to represent a war that was fought, battle that was fought.
For you will see that flag flying in Gloucester next week a lot.
That flag hangs in the Rising Eagle. We actually have at the Rising Eagle, we have one of our artifacts is a cannonball that was dug up from Breed's Hill, and so I got that, mounted that, and above it, of course, is the Battle of Bunker Hill flag. So it's represented on Main Street, Melrose, but.
Well, yeah, I don't think I've seen, in North Carolina, I've never seen a Bunker Hill flag flying.
If you go to Bunker Hill Monument, you'll see quite a few of those flags. And up and down the streets, the neighborhood, they hang the flags out there, their flagpoles, and so you become pretty aware of it when you get closer to the actual spots. So.
Well, are there any other, surprisingly lesser known details about the flag that you want to share?
I can't think of anything more on that one. I one of the things I talked about, the Join or Die flag. I mean, that actually, evolved into becoming the Gladstone flag. I always find it mystifying that the universal sign for evil became the symbol for what, American resistance and American strength and enlightenment. And I haven't seen anyone explain that, but,
Yeah,
I mean, it's amazing. And it talks to the brilliance of Benjamin Franklin. He created that as a cartoon back when the British were preparing to battle with the French. And I mean, it took off like wildfire. Whatever the symbolism was of that flag, it literally, it transitioned between a cartoon to a flag, and then it repurposed more than once during the Revolution. So,
yeah, one of America's original memes, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing about flags. You get the right flag, and very emotionally tied to it.
So I will tell you one little other fun fact. So where we are standing right now, this is our restaurant. It was the Lyceum, and it was from this building, this location, where Alexander Graham Bell sent the first public display of a phone call. Hello, Watson, I presume? Down the phone lines, right, from this building. So that's why we came down here, because we have an upstairs room that's quiet, but it's also a truly, and it was right down the street from where Leslie's Retreat happened. Leslie's Retreat was the first battled for the American Revolution that didn't happen. So
I just want to go hang with you guys.
I know.
That's another story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that's Massachusetts and that area. There's just tons of history. Well, thank you both again. This has been really fun. And I agree with Bill. This has been super easy from us. So we loved having you
I didn't
on.
break a sweat today. Thank you, guys.
Thank you again.
Thank you for listening to Freedom and Glory, Tales of American Spirit. We hope today's story inspired you to take action, embrace challenges, and pursue your dreams. To explore our collection of American-made flags and products that celebrate resilience and craftsmanship, visit us at carrot-top.com. That's carrot-top.com. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with others who appreciate stories of determination and hope. Until next time, stay resilient and keep your flag flying high.